You've made it through pleating and blocking your bishop, but now you're trying to achieve a pretty neckline with gentle curves, no turtlenecking hot messes, but how? Let's dive into the process looking at all the tips and tricks along the way. I would recommend two methods. The first method utilizes freezer paper. Seriously, love this stuff. Once you have your bishop block, simply iron the glossy side of the freezer paper onto your fabric using an iron without any steam. Wait for the heat to dissipate and then carefully take the assembly to your machine. At this point, you're just looking to secure those pleats into place. You could simply do a row of stitches without the addition of piping or a bias like a fabric bias band. If you really want to take things one step at a time, maybe you're getting overwhelmed with too many layers, which is totally fine. Then you'll move on to placing your pieces. Maybe you want some piping. I'm placing my piping around those pleats and skipping over the facing like that placket area. This happens to be having a facing, but you may have a placket for your bishop, but I'm going to skip over that area for right now. And a bonus tip, trim down your piping to the seam allowance so it makes life easier. But yeah, at this point, I'm only concerned with getting those pleats secured down. You'll see I stopped stitching when I finished the pleats on the other side. This step could be a bias band instead. Regardless, the first round of stitches, I like to lengthen just a tad, maybe something around like a 2.5 or a 3. Is there a unit? I don't know. Good question. Go ask your mother. Gently tear the freezer paper under the stitches and then it will release above those stitches. It'll just come right away. What's the second method that I recommend? Hand basting. There are pros and cons to both methods, and those are the only two methods I have found that work for me. So alas, they are the only two methods I can recommend to anybody else. But by all means, it's sewing, so you do you. Now, coming back to those areas that we skipped over, and how do we polish off the neckline at this point? Good questions. So if you have a placket, you can install that here, and I have a separate video that goes over how to install plackets. This bishop happened to have a facing instead. So to give some stability to the facing, I used some German interfacing that was already cut to 2-inch wide strips from Farmhouse Fabrics. It's a gem of a product, a little bit of a squirrel, but a gem of a product since the 2-inch wide strips saves so much time and hassle, and I'm just cutting that down to a 1-inch wide width, and I iron that onto my facing area. And I sewed the facing in place, which could have been done by hand, but I just did it by machine for this garment. Now that the facing placket is complete, I went back around the piping, reducing my stitch length back to one that's more appropriate for permanent secure seams. And I went from one side all the way around to the other side. Another trick is to pull out the cording from the piping on each end to reduce the bulk as the piping turns the corner. Neat, right? Now, here is a massive piece of advice. Sure, it's sewing, you do you, but really, you should do this. Like everyone should do this. To finish off a bishop, you're gonna need a fabric bias band. If you have another method, I'd love to see it. I'm all ears to learn new things, but anywho, yeah, get your fabric bias band. How wide to cut the sucker, that's a personal preference. On the narrow side of life, I like to say around like 1.5 inches, but on the wide side, I would say like 2.25, 2.5, something around there. Then fold the bias band in half lengthwise, ironing that into place. From there, iron a curve into your bias band. Do not skip this step. Do not collect $200. It is game-changing. Really, it is life-changing. And get that curve tight. Take it to your bishop, and if it's too gradual of a curve, go and curve the bias band some more until it fits your bishop. I mean, it doesn't need to fit like a glove, but you get the idea. Now you'll stitch this around your bishop. I recommend stitching with the previous stitches of the neckline facing up. Voila! Last but certainly not least, how to finish the fabric bias band down. I highly recommend doing this by hand. And it's a pretty easy, relaxing process that allows you to hide your stitches, unlike trying to stitch the edge into place on your sewing machine. It's going to turn into a hot mess in a hurry. You're going to see your stitches. It's going to get all winky wonky. Just do it by hand, okay? It's not going to take that long, and it's going to be better for all the things. So to do this, go around your bishop and test fit your band into place. Ideally, you want to fold it over and have the edge of the band just touch those machine stitches. If the seam is too big, trim away in small bits. Trim at it in very small bits. It is really easy to trim away too much, and sure, it's not the end of the world. You can still sew it down using those pleats down below, but just a heads up. So from there, tie on your thread. I like to go a little ways away, sending my needle in between the layers of fabric, which hides the tail of the thread. Just a lovely little, polished thing. Then I create a loop, wrap my needle around a few times in that loop, and pull through, which results in a knot. So from there, fold the bias band over and the piping, if you have piping on your garment, and then fold everything down. So folding over is one motion, and then folding down as a separate motion. From there, go from one machine stitch to the folded edge of the fabric bias band, skipping everything that's been folded over. Just go from one machine stitch to the folded edge. Again, from one machine, how can I say that? How many times can I say that quickly, right? I can't. One machine stitch to the folded edge. And once you've done this a few times, give that a gentle pull and everything should start going into place and tidying up. You may need to give things a little bit of a wiggle, a little bit of you need to go into your place, but yeah, it should go something like this and look neat and tidy. So how do you pleat 2 layers of fabric together at once? Go check out this video where I give away that process along with all the tips and tricks. If you have any questions, of course, put them down in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching and I hope to catch y'all next time.